Classical architecture is one of the most inspiring styles of construction, from the temples of the ancient gods of old to the aesthetics of modern-day democracy. So in this video, we'll be taking a look at the fundamentals of classical design and see how we can apply them in Minecraft to give our builds that monumental feeling of timeless elegance and structural harmony. And to do so, we must first take a look at the key elements of classical architecture, specifically the columns, the entablature, and the pediment. From there, we can talk about symmetry and proportion, and also what materials we should be on the lookout for. Now, depending on what size or scale you're building at, you're going to have more or less leeway in terms of detail, and as you can see, it will ultimately determine your limits. Nevertheless though, we'll come back to these columns a bit later, but I want to take you through the three main classical orders of columns, those being Doric, which are simple and sturdy looking, Ionic, which are meant to be graceful and kind of scroll-like, and Corinthians, which are ornate and have the iconic acanthus leaves. This is something that was hard to translate into Minecraft, but you'll see how we managed to pull it off. So the first order, Doric, which is the simplest of the three, is also the easiest to recreate in Minecraft. You see, even at these smaller scales, we're able to pull it off because it simply doesn't have a lot of ornate detail. Now, depending on what your block palette is, the decorated pots we got a couple updates ago do a phenomenal job at giving us just the right amount of variance, not only in color, but also and importantly, in girth. At the end of the day, we don't want our columns to just be these 1x1 pillars. The decorated pot gives this great transition between the girth of walls and that of full blocks. Now, I'm going to skip over Ionic columns and leave them for last so that we can talk about Corinthians, arguably the most beautiful of the three orders. So remember, they're the most ornate of them all, so we have to think about what in Minecraft would allow us to achieve this effect. What blocks allow us to achieve such level of detail? And the answer is, well, whatever you can think of. But here's what I found works best. Alright, so ever since we got the bamboo trapdoors, I almost immediately knew that I would be using them for these columns. I mean, look at them. They look perfect in this context, allowing us to simulate the intricacies of a Corinthian column. Plus, when we combine them with things like fence gates, fences, and iron bars, we can really get some nice shapes out of it all. But that's not all. You see, by using walls and stairs, and very importantly the chiseled blocks, we can also add texture to our columns. That would be very hard to do if we simply didn't have them in our build. Now, you can go simpler or more extravagant, again depending on your scale, and I'll show you how I've applied some of these in real builds a bit later on, but let's move on to Ionic columns now. So these are, in my opinion, the hardest to translate into Minecraft. Circles are an already hard thing to do, and at such a small scale, I've only really found one or two things that really work. So fence gates can kind of give us this effect, and as you can see, it works decently enough. And the same can be said for using the mangrove trapdoor. But if anyone has anything better, then please feel free to tell the class in the comments down below. Okay, so let's take a look at some examples where I've been able to implement classical columns into my builds. So this is a French maison that I built when the decorated pots came out as a bit of a proof of concept. And you can see that what really makes this build are the columns I was able to create. So you can see that this entire first level uses the most simple form of, let's say, Doric columns with no extra fancy business. But I do want to say that by adding a different wall down here, you can integrate a bit more detail or color that you otherwise could. All in all, I feel like it works pretty well. Now, on this upper level, we decided to go ahead and use trapdoors to give a bit more detail. We're using bamboo trapdoors to give off an air of Corinthian, and the mangrove trapdoors to give off this effect of Ionic columns. Though, of course, we could even use fence gates, and I think it works decently well too, especially considering that we're working at a scale that is, all things considered, quite small. This is of course quite different to this giant build where I was able to use a variant of the column I was showing you guys, but then again, since we're building at such a large scale, we're able to include a hell of a lot more detail that makes the build all that much more impressive. But such a large build could quickly turn into a headache if not done properly. So let's talk about the entablature now, and how to use it to divide our build into easy to digest parts by our eyes. So the entablature, that's the upper horizontal portion of our build that can come just before the roof, can be used at both large and small scales quite effectively. And I actually want to jump right into a couple examples from some of my own builds. Okay, so this is a courthouse I built way before, and you can see just how much heavy lifting the entablature is doing here in terms of allowing us to add detail. From the base wall, we're actually giving it 2 entire block worth of space to play around with. Specifically, by using smooth stairs and normal sandstone stairs, we can create these gaps that give us not only more depth, but by using these stairs with a texture, we're mimicking reliefs on our facade. That is, carvings or sculptural elements that you would find in detailed buildings. From there, playing with different textures of slabs and such can add extra detail, which makes sure our build is not committing the cardinal sin of being boring. Every part of our build that our eyes lie on must be visually interesting and not clash with other aspects of the build. This can be achieved by creating depth with our stairs, having different textures like with our slabs, but by also creating interesting shapes at larger scales. This really helps to transition from our outer wall into our roofs, not by having the smooth transition, but by having them separated by the entablature, allowing us to appreciate each part independently and not have them clashing with each other. But I also want to bring up an important point. So you can actually use things like buttons, and in this case small amethyst buds, to give not only a pop of color, but again some interesting shapes but at a smaller scale. Now these aren't technically entablatures, but these horizontal elements also help to sort of divide our build up into vertical layers, making it so that our eyes are instinctively drawn to certain parts of the build and don't get overly exhausted. And the best part is that this can easily be applied to a large build like this one, or a small build given its simpler details. So you can see how from some basic fundamentals, we can apply them to our builds in ways that aren't traditionally done in architecture, but are still able to work quite well. Now, before we move on, I want to show you my museum build, because in my opinion, it actually has one of the best entablatures I've built, even though it might be one of my older builds in this world. So I've created this pattern of triangles that extend the whole length on top of this smooth quartz backdrop. Now, this was built 100% in survival Minecraft on a server with some friends and I actually used to have, and I used this to show off my extreme wealth by using solid diamond blocks. But I will say, if I had access to raw gold blocks back then, or some other interesting block like that, then I probably would have integrated them into the build just to give it a bit more color and detail. But what makes it really interesting is that those diamond blocks actually tell a story, just how you might find carvings in a classical build. And you can see I wasn't shy about it and gave it a lot of block real estate to play with. Now, another aspect of classical architecture that also isn't shy about showing itself off is of course the pediment. That is the big triangular part you would find at the top of the main entrance to a building. So in Minecraft, how can we achieve this effect? Well, first of all, it's by getting the triangle right. And I've really only found one correct way to do it. You see, if you were to use stairs or full blocks, it just doesn't look right. Its incline or angle is just too sharp. So if not 45 degrees, then let's move one step down, and instead of 1 block sideways, 1 block up, let's do 2 blocks sideways and 1 block up, and see how that works. Okay, so that seems to immediately look way better, but there are some tricks we can pull off with some slabs that really make it look perfect. By putting slabs on the interior at every other block, and by replacing the corresponding exterior block with a slab, we get this beautiful, gentle slope that gives off just the vibe we're looking for. Feel free to pause the video here if you want to see exactly how to pull it off, But just to show you guys that I'm not lying to you, let's take a look at some of my own builds where you can see that I use this exact technique. Okay, so back to this courthouse build, and you can actually quite clearly see that we were using the alternating slab and block pattern to get that gentle slope. And I want to point out that the ends here end with full blocks, before we have some detail with the whole stairs and slab shenanigans. This is different to this little proof of concept temple that I built here, where it ends on a slab, or it's half a block above this main line. And I want to point out that this looks pretty good, despite it being quite small. But at the end of the day, it really is quite similar to the big boy build I have over here. Alright, so while we're here, why don't we start talking about what is on the inside of our triangles? So, usually in the real world, you would again have reliefs or sculptures that end up telling some story. And while that's a bit hard to do unless you're working with armor stands and all of that stuff, you can pull off a similar effect by doing what we did here. By using some prismarine slabs and stairs and walls, we managed to make some nice intricate details that I think look quite fantastic. We got this sort of central heart over here, as well as some wispy air-like curls and whatnot. The key is to really have them spaced out so that they are individual structures that aren't eating into each other. Now, obviously, it can be a bit hard to pull off again at smaller scales, but I think it turned out quite fine over here. Now, if we look at the courthouse, I put a big old C for courthouse and some more wispy air looking tendrils, and it really managed to get the point across while maintaining its elegance. Same over here for my museum build, where I put a big A for the afterlife server. And since this build has two pediments, one on the front and one on the back, I went ahead and made two different designs which both look awesome. So feel free to copy any of these artistic elements if you like them. So I want to point out two quick things in terms of color. So I found that mushroom stem, although a bit of a pain in the bum to get, actually looks really good because of the subtle like wavy texture that it has. Though don't get me wrong, smooth quartz also looks decently well, and you might not even notice the difference. The second point I want to bring up is the fact that here we're using prismarine, and that's just because the color contrast looks really pretty in my opinion. But you can, like on this build, use the same block palette as your main build, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's all up to preference at this point. Okay, so really quickly, let's see how we can also apply pediments to other aspects of our builds. So right off the bat, you have to think about windows, right? So not only do they manage to top them off quite well, harmonizing them with the rest of the build, but as you can see, you can use color and texture in this case to bring out something interesting inside the triangles, instead of using slabs and stairs like in our big pediments. In this case, I used lapis lazuli and raw gold blocks so that we have these beautiful colors and textures pop out that give off an elegant vibe. And if we pivot to the French townhouse, you can see that I managed to pull off some really nice looking micro pediments, and you can see that they're actually quite easy to make, and I'd love to see how you guys would be able to apply them in your own builds. Alrighty, now I want to finish off by talking about something really important, and that is what materials you're using. You see, believe it or not, using quartz, arguably the material closest to marble we have, simply doesn't look all that good when it comes to building in Minecraft. It's much too white, it doesn't work with shadows, and it simply ends up looking like a type of ghost build. Some very viable alternatives that I found to work quite well is, first of all, stone brick variants. Now, if you're working in survival, this is also especially nice because stone is quite an easy material to obtain. I've used it for my museum build, which I've already shown off to you guys, but also for this bank build, which I kind of wanted to go for this sort of neoclassical feel similar to the Federal Reserve. So let's get to the more controversial opinion if you're a Minecraft OG. But endstone, specifically endstone bricks, seem to really work quite well, despite it having this sort of almost greenish tint to it, which puts a lot of people off. I actually wouldn't mind if Mojang were to perhaps not retexture, but recolor it. And they could honestly do the same with purple blocks, I also don't like those. Okay, but they work quite well for two reasons. The first is that the color is actually just similar enough to the sandstone line of blocks, but by being a bit darker, it does make it a very viable option if you don't want it all to look like a sand castle. I don't know. At the end of the day, the endstone is also being more of a canvas, using it for the walls of the build than for actually texturing and detail. Okay, so the second reason why it's a very viable block is because sandstone does not have a brick variant. So it sort of acts as the stopgap in this unfulfilled niche. And finally, let's talk about the GOAT in my opinion, and that's of course sandstone. You can really use it to create some nice effects like in this town hall I made, and if you hold that pattern in mind for a second, you can see that I used it in the build to give our walls a bit more detail between the smooth sandstone and the cut sandstone variant. And this can be said about combining the normal sandstone variants and their smooth variants all across, whether it be slabs or stairs. The fundamentals of classical building are really quite simple, and I hope you guys learned something new today. I've been TakePro, and thank you very much for watching.